I just finished rewatching one of my favorite shows ever, Legends of Tomorrow. Aside from this last season being really quite bad, I love that show. If you're not familiar, the premise is that this ragtag group of dishy misfits have to travel throughout time and make sure the timeline is intact. They have to make sure history happens the way it's supposed to happen. On the surface, it's not an interesting premise per se until you really think about what you would do if you had a time machine. There is that grand tradition of planning to kill Hitler as a child, or stopping Kennedy from being assassinated, or stopping September 11th from happening. All sound like great ideas. All have massive, perhaps disastrous consequences if executed. A fun thought experiment, but history is not something that should be messed with. The other part of history and time travel is whose history is it, who tells it, and how people will be judged by history. I think the musical Hamilton puts it the best. Who lives, who dies, who tells your story? There is an old saying, one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. And that part is super fascinating to me. Some folks obviously history's greatest monsters, but other folks could be misunderstood rebels. That is what I want to talk about today. A few weeks ago, I stumbled across this article from The Guardian about the Tlaxcala people and how they are not traitors. Now, if you know about the history of the Conquest, you might consider the Tlaxcala and other tribes like them traitors. But are they though? If you don't know the story, well, you're in luck, because I will tell you all about it. And I'll ask you now and afterwards, are they traitors? In this video, we're going to go through the history of the Conquest, the indigenous slave girl who changed the world, and the question that has been on my mind for the past few weeks. Are these folks traitors? Let's find out. Treason Uno, a super brief history lesson. It's
cultural appropriation
time.
Cultural appropriation.
But make it fashion. If this is very offensive, I am sorry, but here we go. I'm not sure if this is Tlaxcala or another Nahua tribe. Nahua tribes are other tribes in Mexico that spoke a version of the ancient Aztec Mexica language, Nahuatl. But I googled some stuff and this is what I got. And we're doing it, even though this might be what the kids call a bad look. I'm gonna try and make this as quick as possible. Not because it's not important, but because it is a long and complicated history. And I'm going to summarize it in a video on youtube.com. What could possibly go wrong? In the late 1200s AD or CE, however it is you like to count your time, a little tribe called the Mexica were told by their main god Huitzilopochtli to leave their homeland of Aztlan to find a mythical promised land. How would the Mexica know they arrived in the promised land? They'd know when they saw a nopal cactus in the middle of a giant lake with a giant eagle eating a snake perched on it. I've seen that somewhere before, but where? The place they saw this eagle was in Lake Texcoco, and they built Tenochtitlan on that lake. Tenochtitlan is now modern-day Mexico City. Yes, Mexico City is built on marshland on top of a lake. The Mexica were not the only ones who wanted the central Mexican land/lake all to themselves. Other tribes, including the Chichimec, Toltec, Tepanec, and Nahua tribes, were fighting a war to lay claim to that sweet land/lake and power in that region. The Mexica became the dominant tribe after it formed its now famous Triple Alliance. In 1428, the tribes of Texcoco and Tlacopan joined forces with the Mexica and conquered the entire region, along with every single tribe in Mexico they could. Fun fact, if you are from Mexico or descended of people from Mexico and you have native lineage, it's not Mexica, aka Aztec. The Mexica were so thoroughly wiped out by the Spanish, Nahua tribes, and disease, there is no way anyone can trace their heritage back to the Aztecs. If you do have indigenous Mexican blood, it is most likely that you're a descendant from a tribe that either didn't interact with the Mexica at all, or you were one of the tribes that hated them and aided in their annihilation. Now, you might be asking, if there are no Mexica, why is that the only tribe we all know about and study? Because of the Spanish. Petty asshole Cortez and his men were not the only ones who landed in Mexico. They also brought along a bunch of priests. Remember how I mentioned at the beginning of the video how fascinating it is who lives, who dies, who tells your story? The priests learned how to speak Nahuatl and were not interested in conquest. They just wanted to save the souls of these savages. The priests were in awe of the Mexica culture and how many books they had. While petty asshole Cortez was killing Mexica people and destroying their entire culture, the priests were saving a lot of the Mexica books and writing down their traditions. That is why most of the stuff we know about the Mexica and their traditions come from three main sources: the Duran Codex, the Codex Mendoza, and the Florentine Codex, written by priests and Spanish scholars. Since we know about the Mexica through sources other than the Mexica themselves, is why we call them the Aztecs and not the Mexica. Mexica is the name they call themselves. Aztec is the name someone else gave them. Remember, it's important who tells your story. The Mexica were the dominant tribe in Mexico for about 100 years. For that century, the Mexica were dominant over the other Nahua tribes in the region. The other Nahua tribes were forced to give the Mexica gold and other tributes. The Mexica would periodically go into those other tribes and kidnap people so they could do their human sacrifices. They would also take folks from those other tribes and make them slaves in Tenochtitlan. So as you can see, those other tribes really hated the Mexica and were waiting for the exact moment to take them down. With good reason, I would argue. Fun fact, one of the favorite ways the Mexica sacrificed people was to rip hearts out of people's still alive and fully conscious bodies. Yep. In 1518, petty asshole Hernán Cortés landed in Mexico, founded the city of Veracruz, and went looking for the rumored astonishing treasure of Tenochtitlan. A lot of the conquest is not well documented, so what is told is based on a lot of rumors and what Cortés told people had happened. Another instance of who tells your story. We all know that history is told by the winners, and in this case, not all the winners, just the petty asshole that was Cortez. History has told us that the Mexica saw blonde petty asshole Cortez and thought he was a god, so the Mexica instantly gave over everything to Cortez, and the conquest was just that easy. It took Cortez and the Spanish about 10 years to fully conquer not just the Mexica, but most of the tribes of Mexico. It took 2 years for historians to declare Cortez as the guy who defeated the Aztec Empire. There's no certainty who said Cortez was a god. Cortez's letters back to Spain gave no indication that he was being treated or seen as a god. The god story was most likely something that La Malinche, we will talk about her in the next section, told both Montezuma II and Cortez. Also, the priests in Mexico would tell the indigenous people God sent the priests and friars to help save them. That story is believed to have evolved into the Cortez is a god story. This is what I mean by the details of the conquest are murky and no one knows for sure what happened. What we do know, though, is the Spanish and Cortez couldn't possibly conquer the Mexica by themselves. Cortez had to flee Tenochtitlan a few times because the Mexica almost killed him and all of his men. Cortez got wind that the other indigenous tribes hated the Mexica and decided to form an alliance with them to take down the Mexica. The Mexica had about 500 tribes under their rule. The strongest tribe and the best allies the Spanish got were the Tlaxcalan people. Other Nahua tribes also joined to eliminate the Mexica, but the best known and the strongest were the Tlaxcala. Without the Tlaxcala, it would have been impossible for the conquest to take place. Thanks to disease, the Tlaxcala/other tribes, and famine, the Mexica were wiped off the face of the earth. Because of this alliance, the Tlaxcala are considered traitors. The Tlaxcala, when Cortez and his men arrived in the Mexican Valley, fought and tried to kill the Spanish. Then both the indigenous folks and the Spanish realized realized they had a common enemy. The alliance was very much the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of thing. So I ask you again, were the Tlaxcala/other tribes traitors? We'll get back to that in a couple of sections. Now, the Tlaxcala and other indigenous nations were not the only allies Cortez had. Cortez had an amazing ace up his sleeve. A woman whose name has become the go-to term for describing a traitor or a self-hating Mexican. Malinche, Doña Marina, La Malinche. Let's talk about her. Treason 2, La Malinche, aka the indigenous slave girl who changed the world. La Malinche is a very controversial figure in Mexican history. She is seen as the mother of mestizos, but also the #1 traitor and hater of Mexicans. Let's get into her history. There is very little written and known about La Malinche. There are some accounts that have her as the child of an Aztec chief, and others that have her as a child of a different Nahua tribe noble. It's unclear if she was kidnapped as a kid to be sold into slavery, or if after her father died, her mother sold her into slavery anyway. What is known is that La Malinche was sold into slavery and she was traded throughout all the tribes in the central Mexican valley until she landed in Mayan territory. While living with the Maya, La Malinche learned Yucatec and Chantal Maya. When Cortez landed in what is now Veracruz, he was given about 20 slave women, including La Malinche. After that, a Spanish dude named Jerónimo de Aguilar was living with the Maya and worked with La Malinche and Cortez as a translator. La Malinche would translate Nahuatl to Maya, then Aguilar would translate from Maya to Castellan. Eventually, La Malinche learned how to speak Castellan and became Cortez's sole translator. It was believed for a long time that La Malinche was only a translator and mistress of Cortez, but more recent accounts show that she was crucial in strategizing against the Mexica and forming alliances with other tribes in the central Mexican valley. She saved the Spanish from surprise attack. She negotiated with the Cholula and Tlaxcala to help provide care and food for the Spanish. She convinced all the Nahua tribes she could to side with the Spanish and attack the Mexica. Controversial opinion, but La Malinche was very much a badass. I'm pretty sure I just canceled myself in Mexico, but prove me wrong. Her boss-ass bitch mode is made even more epic when you consider that La Malinche also changed the world. We always talk about how the Spanish changed Mexico and Latin America, but we never discuss how Mexico and Latin America changed the world. While I was looking for news references and scholarly articles, all they focused on was how Cortez conquered the Mexica. Nothing is written about how much Mexico contributed to the growth and prosperity of the world. Again, it is beyond important who it is that tells the story. Since we are talking about Mexico and the Mexica, let's touch on a few things we know for sure. I would love to talk about all the contributions from the rest of Latin America, but this video is already longer than I intended. Maybe in the future. Let's start off with food. The stupid French are known as masters of the cuisine, and all the best food is French, apparently. Who actually eats legit French food? And fries don't count. 3 of the most important staples in all of food came from Mexico: tomatoes, chocolate, and chilies. We even use their altered names from their original Nahuatl names: tomatl, chocolatl, and xi. Tomatoes are the backbone of a lot of cuisine, Italian in particular. Chocolate is a staple of life. For those innovative patisserie chefs who are making savory chocolate dishes, putos please. We've been doing that for literally centuries. And chiles, how bland would existence be without chiles? As we explored in this video about chiles I did a couple of months ago, chiles' introduction into Europe changed not only food, but trade as well. Salt, pepper, and other spices were the huge money-making empires of Europe. Almost all of that stuff came from Asia and was super expensive. After the Conquest happened, all of a sudden there was chile that essentially replaced pepper and salt on food. And there was also a place that could produce better salt, sugar, and spices at a much much cheaper price. Spain was in an enviable financial position. Then there was all the gold and silver mining that happened. Spain took so many thousands of tons of gold and silver back to Europe. That gold and silver helped fund the Spanish's opulent lifestyle. Silver and gold also funded a lot of Spanish wars. The Spanish fought the Italians and the French a lot. During one of those wars, the Spanish were able to stop the Ottoman Empire from expanding, thanks mostly to King Charles V, who was able to become Holy Roman Emperor because of all that sweet, sweet Aztec gold. That's twice now in history when the super Catholic Spanish stopped Europe from becoming Muslim. Whether that is good or bad, you'll have to ask a historian or someone like that. The conquest of Mexico literally changed the entire world, and it happened because of a native Mexican slave woman. It's wild that we never talk about this. Why don't we talk about this? We should be talking about this. It's very important. Who tells your story? Treason 3. Are they traitors? The Tlaxcala and other Nahua tribes are framed as traitors because they sided with the Spanish instead of siding with the Mexica. It's not as if the Tlaxcala and the Mexica were best friends, promising to always have each other's backs. Then the Spanish come along, test that loyalty, and the Tlaxcala are like, psych! We're hanging out with the whites now. Sorry, bruh. That's not what happened, though. As established, the Mexica were dominant, violent jerks who showed no kindness, loyalty, or goodwill to other tribes. Did the Tlaxcala make a mistake siding with and helping the Spanish dominate all of Mexico and most of Latin America? Probably. It might be seen as a mistake now, but at the time, there was no reason not to trust the white devils. The Spanish couldn't possibly be worse than the Mexica. Oh, you sweet summer child. Were they traitors though? Or did they see a way to finally be rid of the control the Mexica had over them and other Nahua tribes in the Central Valley? La Malinche is seen as a traitor because she was the ultimate mastermind and the reason the Mexica were defeated. But remember, she was sold into slavery and traded over and over and over again as a native Nahua woman. Once she was given to Cortez, she was no longer a slave woman. La Malinche was renamed Doña Marina and was given a position of power and respect. Doña Marina wasn't just a mistress that slept her way to the top. La Malinche was the fierce architect of the downfall of the most vicious tribe in Mesoamerica. La Malinche changed the world, but is she a traitor? Or did she do the logical thing and side with the folks who respected her and didn't treat her like sexual property? What do you guys think? Leave me a comment and tell me why these folks are traitors or why they are not. I don't think they were traitors. They did what they had to do to survive. They weighed out their options and the best one was to side with the Spanish. How messed up were the Mexica that the best option was to side with a bunch of bumbling criminal white boys? Yikes. Fight me in the comments. Final thoughts. Hey, HBO. I know after Game of Thrones ended, you guys are jonesing for the next big cultural thing. I have a great idea. A couple of ideas, actually, but one that will put you guys back on top. Spoilers? It's related to this, but in a compelling story structure kind of way. You'll get a whole new loyal audience, and we will get the much needed representation. As I am discovering, not only is representation important, but also telling different stories is important too. Who lives, who dies, who tells your story. My sister keeps telling me to go back to school and get a degree and all of this stuff. That might not be a bad idea. Now, if I wasn't such a loser that gets rejected from everyone, everything, and everywhere, I'd apply. I am doing an excellent job of selling myself right here. If any scholarly people are watching, you know you want me in your Indigenous Studies programs. Salud, mi familia.